Hello everyone and welcome to this Lucia episode. Two things. First, Elis, thank you so much for designing a logo for me. It's awesome. Second, Nordic countries are dark. They are dark. They are dark. They are so dark that there are long periods of time where the sun doesn't even come across the horizon. That's how dark they are. And then in mid-December you have a solstice, and during the solstice it changes around and it gets lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter until the sun never sets, basically. And then it changes again and it goes back into the darkness. So naturally you would want some kind of celebration to mark the passage of the sun. Maybe a Catholic saint from the days of yore. Maybe a strange peasant tradition. Or maybe a mishmash with a lot of things that a guy really liked.
St Lucia was a young woman in Syracuse, present-day Italy. There are multiple versions of the Lucia myth, but the most common version is that she was executed due to her refusing to marry as she wanted to remain chaste and serve God. Became a martyr, more or less. The myth often includes her body being burned in a fire and brutally dismembered. She died in 304 AD at about 20 years of age.
And St. Lucia's Day is December 13th, which is the day that her memory is celebrated within the Catholic community. And it used to be that in Scandinavia too, before the Reformation happened in the 16th century. When that happened, the religious idea of the Italian Saint Lucia was really diminished quite dramatically, because in Protestantism, or Lutheran Protestantism at least, you do not really worship saints. The Lucia status has a lot more to do with her day, which is December 13th. That has a very special place within Nordic folklore. Today I am not going to subject you to a long discussion about calendar reforms, but we need to look at the old calendar, the Julian calendar, that was used before the mid-18th century, basically. When the calendar reform happened, a lot of dates were switched around. But before this, December 13th was actually the darkest night of year. Calendar reform happened, dates were switched around a bit, but that the specific date of December 13th was really stuck. And when you look at it, it sits very well with the night turning and it's becoming darker at Lucia Day, because her name in Latin, lux, light. So the bringer of light, naturally. Now, the thing is that wasn't really understood very well in peasant Nordic or Scandinavian cultures. Because you heard the name Lucia, it's a bit of a foreign name that people wouldn't really hear all the time. So you would say it would be transformed to Lusse in the vernacular. You got Lusse, Lucia, Lusse, Lucifer. This is the night of Lucifer.
That meant, other than being depressingly dark, it was also very dangerous. It was believed that the very sun stopped moving, that animals could speak, and that the dead crawled out of their graves this night. So, naturally, people stayed up, drinking and eating heavily throughout the night. Young people, probably bored out of their minds in this dark rural place, took this opportunity to dress up and run around between farms begging for food and drink. These makeshift costumes could be interesting. Yeah, it looked like the Purge. It's straight out the Purge. I'm not kidding.
These boys were usually accompanied by the Lusse bride, which would be sometimes a local girl and sometimes a figure made out of straw as well. Because the Lusse bride is not really Lucia, she's not really a saint, because she is obliged to dance with all men and all boys present, which would make her quite promiscuous in a very conservative peasant society. So you might notice that we're already quite far away from an Italian saint. Yes, okay, good. And now we're getting into the late 18th century and early 19th century, or the 19th century as a whole, where a lot of things happen with this tradition. And one of them is that you can actually find more and more people from wealthier stratas that actually celebrates this. And the earliest description of a Lucia celebration, where there is a lady looking somewhat like I'm looking right now, is from 1764, from where they say that there is a woman. She is dressed in white. She's got wings, which I don't have because we don't have that anymore. She has wings, and in each hand she's carrying a big silver candelabra with a big candle in it. And after this, the lady in white starts to appear more and more in art and records, basically within the bourgeoisie and even with the noblesse. And now we're coming to something that's very, very important for this tradition, and that is national romanticism. Because during the 19th century, the idea of the nation was all the rage, and you try to find these ancient and unique bits about your own culture and your own society that's unique and special. And this happens in many cultures, and it plays a big part in the formation of national identities, basically, that was super trendy at this time. Look, we are not going to look at Nordic historical or national romanticism right now, but we need to know that there was a lot of that, like a lot. And you can see where I'm going with this, because naturally the Lucia thing was a given to be picked up by this movement, because it has rather vague origins and it has very clear visuals. You see the way I'm dressed, and you could do a lot of things with it. It was very good to pick up, deconstruct, reconstruct the way you wanted it. You take the things you like and you discard the things you don't like.
Dr. Hazelius, one of the daddies, you could say, of national romantic sentiments in Scandinavia, introduced Lucia as a celebration at his open-air museum, the Skansen, in Stockholm, in the 1890s. He went all in on the Maiden of Light angle and dropped the Lussebrud slut-shaming bits. This really made Lucia properly introduced as a national thing. Further, it isn't a coincidence that the look of Lucia was more reminiscent of the works of contemporary artists like Bauer and Larsson than anything you'd see in like the contemporary peasant society.
And she got her iconic song, and the song is just as much of a mishmash as the rest. It's traditional song from Neapel in present-day Italy, and it was translated actually to Italian in the early 1800s, and then you would have Scandinavian travelers finding this tune because it's rather lovely, bringing it back, and it would be translated from the Italian translation into, in this case, Swedish, and it would be quite literal. But when this song was connected to the Lucia celebration, the lyrics had like a massive overhaul because he wanted it to fit this archaic Nordic solstice tradition. And actually those lyrics, in at least in Swedish, they are very, very archaic. Like, many adults will struggle if you ask them to explain what the song is about. So that's a fun game. Actually, if you meet a Swedish person, ask them to explain the Lucia song. And like 9 out of 10, they will say it's something about darkness. And the Lucia celebration has always carried elements of drag and gender bending, for example. Just listen to this account from 1820.
When 6 dishes were eaten and only the 7th dessert remained, the guests were surprised by a peculiar sight. The double doors of the entry hall were opened, and a farmhand dressed in a white sheet with a crown of light entered the room carrying a big bowl of mulled wine.
As this celebration and this custom became more and more popular with the upper strata in society, it started to appear more and more at universities, and a large group of the population was actually not really allowed in universities, generally speaking, and that was women. So you would find guys like this guy having a grand old time during the Lucia drag. It's actually also a thing that when there are schools that's having votes about which student would be the school official Lucia, because usually there are like a Lucia for each school. Usually someone submits a boy's name as a joke, and then students, they are rebellious and they start to vote for the guy because they're like, oh, we're not gonna pick a pretty girl, we're gonna stick it to the teachers, and we're gonna pick a boy instead. And they do, and that's actually a tradition that's older than the actual celebration as it looks today, to do a gender bend at Lucia.
The Lucia celebration in its modern streamlined form didn't reach a wide audience until after World War I, and when it took off, it really took off. During the 20th century, the idea of the blonde Nordic Lucia was turned into a straightforward beauty pageant. This is the 1956 pageant for the Stockholm Lucia. The jury, a doctor representing a charity, last year's winner, and a bloke named Hasse. And the blonde girls are paraded around until a winner is chosen.
And this has led to problems. The eugenics idea sort of lives on that, oh, she should be a blonde white girl. She doesn't have to be that at all. She could be any race and basically any gender, any age, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Today, this celebration is found in many places of the world, but it's most common in Sweden, some parts of Norway, some parts of Finland, some parts of Iceland. And after World War II, actually in Denmark, where it was sort of introduced really strong as sort of an act of defiance during the occupation there in the 1940s. And Lucia's entourage has grown substantially during the 20th and 21st centuries, and hopefully it will continue to grow. Because when Dr. Hasse directed this, you know, you got the Lucia, and then you got the star singers, and then you got her maids. Now she's got a full entourage, loads of characters, and they all have their own theme song, and it's awesome. You know, you got the gnomes with the gnome song, and you got the gingerbread men, and you got pastry chef, and you got Zlatan Ibrahimovic. And during later years, like very, very recent, you start to see more and more of this popping up. I found this on a web page when I scrolled Lucia outfit. So then you have the snowman from Frozen, basically, but I guess it's accurate because he is celebrating Lucia in that Frozen adventure film that he did. And most towns and schools and daycare center and elderly homes, for example, celebrate their own Lucia. And you have these massive concerts that sell out, you know, but not this year, please, but still. Massive concerts in churches and concert venues during the songs. And then you got the official Lucia as well, which is broadcasted on live TV, like really, really, really early in the morning. So, to be clear, Lucia as it is today is a construction of a number of influences over a long period of time. Like most traditions are, because traditions are not static entities. They change and they adapt with the times, and they are always reflecting the society that celebrates them. So yes, in 2021, I want to say, because I don't want to see any Lucia things right now, 2021, you can have Olaf from Frozen, but you couldn't have him in 1890. That would look daft. And the way it's staged today, it has very little to do with the Catholic Saint Lucia, and not a lot to do with the old original peasant tradition of yore either. It's a mishmash of a lot of things, and this tradition will come into change. It will change and it will adapt, because that's what traditions do, you know, they change with the times. Thank you so much for watching. I'm so grateful for each and every one of you watching. It's awesome. Please take care, stay safe, and happy Lucia and happy holidays. Bye!